explain it. Let's go to Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6, as we continue looking at this tremendous gospel. We come to what is probably a familiar portion of Scripture to you nonetheless. But Mark chapter 6, we're going to start reading in verse number 30. Mark chapter 6, starting in verse number 30. It says, "And the apostles gathered themselves together unto Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said unto them, Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat. And they departed into a desert place by ship privately. And the people saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran afoot thither out of the cities, and outwent them, and came together unto him. And Jesus, when he came out, saw much people, and was moved with compassion toward them, because they were as sheep, not having a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when the day was now far spent, his disciples came unto him and said, This is a desert place, and now the time is far past. Send them away that they may go into the country round about and into the villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. And he answered and said unto them, Give you them to eat. And they say unto him, Shall we go and buy 200 pennyworth of bread and give them to eat? And he saith unto them, How many loaves have you? Go ye and see. And when they knew, they say, We have 5 and 2 fishes. And he commanded them to make all sit down by the companies upon the green grass. And they sat down in ranks by 100 and by 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, he looked up to heaven, and he blessed, and he brake the loaves, and he gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fishes divided he among them all. And they did all eat, and were filled. And they took up the 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fishes. And they that did eat of the loaves were about 5,000 men. Now, interestingly enough, aside from the resurrection, this is the only miracle that is actually found in all 4 Gospels. And so this is very clearly an important moment within the ministry of Jesus. And I think really the reason being is just the size, the sheer magnitude of this particular miracle. We're not talking about something that was done in a synagogue on an individual basis. We're talking about a very large undertaking in this particular miracle of Jesus. And so, again, depending on your perspective, this is the largest. Obviously, there are far more reaching and larger implications within the resurrection. But as far as the miracles that he did during his earthly ministry, this is the largest by far. And so what the people see Jesus do in this miracle really becomes a turning point for a lot. Even some of his disciples, and in a way we might not expect. We'll talk about that towards the end. Now, this comes on the heels of the disciples returning from their individual, or rather their 2-by-2 preaching expeditions, and Jesus commands a time for reprieve and for rest. We talked about that a few weeks ago. However, the only rest they received is what they got on the boat as they were crossing over the Sea of Galilee. Once they get into the area on the other side, an area around a city called Bethsaida, we see that in Luke chapter 9. They are immediately met by a crowd of people that had literally outrun their boat in order to get to where they thought they would be able to meet Jesus. Now, instead of leaving to a different location, because, again, Jesus had just told his disciples, he read it there in verse 31, this is supposed to be a time of reprieve. This is supposed to be a time of getaway for them, a time of rest and of recuperation. Instead of leaving and saying, no, we need this time of rest, they stay, and Jesus begins to teach and to heal the people that are there. And they stay, and as a result of their staying, Jesus performs one of his greatest miracles. And so let's just go through this morning. We see there in verse number 34, it says, And Jesus, when he came out of the boat, he saw much people, and he was moved with compassion toward them. Now think about this. Again, this was a time of needed rest. And we might not think about that with Jesus. But we must understand that, yes, he was God, but also at this time, he was also 100% man. Jesus was someone who needed times of reprieve. He needed rest for his physical body. And so it would have been very easy for Jesus and the disciples to be, at the least, a little bit put off by what this particular crowd does. Again, seeing Jesus and his disciples, it says there in verse 33, and the people saw them departing, and many knew him. They say, hey, this is Jesus. We better go find him. And it says, and they ran afoot thither out of all the cities and outwent them. And so they see Jesus and the disciples in this boat, and they're literally sprinting to get to where they think he's going to port because, hey, this is Jesus, and hey, we might see a miracle, or maybe perhaps he'll heal me, whatever the case is, and they start running, and they're literally outrunning the boat. And so from a human perspective, you could look at something like that and think, can I just get a minute? Can I just have a time of rest? Can I just have a moment to myself? But Jesus doesn't do that. And so you can just imagine the scene as thousands of people. This isn't just a couple of people or a few families. This is thousands of people are running along the shore trying to be the first one to touch Jesus or to get to him as he gets off of the boat. Now, as we've seen throughout the book of Mark, these people aren't coming to praise or to glorify Jesus. They're coming to see what they can get from Jesus. Right? That's the crowds that have been following him everywhere they went. However, Jesus looks at this crowd and he does not get put off. He doesn't get irritated. He simply shows his amazing love and compassion. You see, for Jesus sees what we cannot. We can only look externally. That's really as far as our perception can take us. But he can look at the heart. He understands their condition. What we may have seen as a selfish group of people who can't even give Jesus a moment to recoup and to recover. Here's how Jesus saw them at the end of verse 34. It says, because they were as sheep, not having a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. It's not that they were selfish. Jesus understood that they were simply misguided. Jesus saw them as sheep. Now, if you've ever really studied sheep or read about sheep, you'll understand a few things. And it really helps us to understand ourselves a little bit better because we're referred to as sheep in the Bible. And so to understand sheep is to understand ourselves a little bit better. And what's interesting is when you do that, you understand that of all the animals that we could be compared to, sheep is probably the one you would least want to be compared to when you look at them as far as their physical characteristics. There are three basic reasons that sheep are generally considered to be practically helpless animals. They are almost utterly helpless and without a shepherd really would not know what to do. Now, number one, they are simply not intelligent. Sheep are very, just to use the word, they are very dumb animals. Okay, and I want to give you a story. This is a true story that kind of showcases this. In 2005, shepherds in Turkey, in the country of Turkey, looked on in absolute dismay at what they saw at this herd of sheep. Over 400 sheep died in one day in Turkey because one sheep walked up to the edge of a cliff and just kept going, just walked straight over the edge of a cliff. And as a result of that one sheep doing it, literally the entire herd just walked towards the edge of this cliff and just walked right over. Over 400 sheep died. Now, the amazing thing is that there were over 1,500 sheep that actually went over the edge of the cliff. And the only reason only 400 died is because they created kind of a pillow at the bottom so that the other 1,100 just kind of rested on them and walked off on their way. You say, well, why do they do that? Because they're not intelligent animals. They saw one sheep go over the edge, and they thought, well, I guess that's what I got to do too. And so they just went on. And so over 1,500 sheep literally walked off the edge of a cliff for no other reason. They were not being chased by any type of predator. They just did it, well, because that's what they did, and so I'm going to do it too. So number one, sheep are not intelligent. Number two, they wander. They wander, and this is something any shepherd could tell you, but what's interesting about sheep is you could set them up in literally a perfect situation. You could find them the perfect place for them to be. You could find a beautiful field of infinite food supply right next to a babbling brook where they could get all the water, because they can't have running water. They don't do well with that. It has to be still water. And it could have all the protection they could need from a predator. But you know what a sheep will do if a shepherd is not keeping a watchful eye? They'll just simply walk away and get lost. That's what sheep do. They will literally just leave the herd, the pack, and they will get lost. And so they're not intelligent animals. They will simply wander without the watchful eye of a shepherd. And number three, they are defenseless. They're defenseless. Sheep have no defense mechanism. They're obviously not predators. They don't have claws. They don't have sharp teeth. They don't have this kind of thing. But they also don't have defense mechanisms. You know, typically animals that are not predators, they'll have some kind of way to let a predator know, don't mess with me. right? You know, you got a rattlesnake. You hear that rattle, and you know, hey, I better get away. Or dogs, you know, they'll growl and they'll bark, and they'll tell whatever predator it is, hey, don't mess with me. You know what a sheep can do? Their only defense mechanism is they can bawl. That's it. They can bawl at the end. Now, if you ever heard a sheep bawl, it's not the most threatening thing you've ever heard. And so for a predator, literally, they're just standing there, and they're just live bait. That's all they are. They're easy prey for any predator who wants to take them away. This is why the job of a shepherd was so important. And so Jesus looks at this group of people, and whereas from our human perspective, we might look at them and think, well, they're just being selfish. I need this time. And Jesus looks at them, and his heart just breaks, and he says, no, they're not selfish. They need a shepherd. They need somebody to guide them. They need somebody to protect them. They need somebody to give them the truth. And that's exactly what he does. So this is how Jesus views people who are lost. Not in pity for them, but in compassion for them. Knowing that he is the shepherd that they need. And so as tired and as in need of rest that they may have been, we talked about that, Jesus in his compassion simply, he just can't leave this group of people. And so they stayed. Jesus teaches them. Matthew and Luke, both in their accounts, they both tell us that he also healed their sick. And so Jesus stays, he and his disciples, and perform another, what we can only imagine, long day of physically exhausting work. Well, as this goes on and continues to happen hour after hour, we understand that a problem arises. Verse 35, and when the day was now far spent, his disciples came unto him and said, this is a desert place, and now the time is far past. Now, when you say that word desert there, that just means it's a wilderness. It's not literally a sand area, but this is if you've ever been in the area of Galilee there, you'll understand that this is more of a wilderness type area. And so they say, send them away, that they may go into the country round about and into the villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. And so the disciples come to Jesus, and really just they're thinking practically here. That's honestly what they're doing. And they're saying, Jesus, listen, we've been going at this all day. Nobody's eaten anything. It's getting to the point now where it's going to get dark. If we don't send them away now, things could be dangerous. And so they need to eat. And so again, they try to come and do this pragmatically. They tell Jesus, you just need to send them away. I don't think this was done in anger. I don't think this was done in irritation. I really do think that they just came to Jesus and they saw the problem and they think this is the obvious solution to this problem. They need to be sent away. Now, the problem here with the disciples is they send them away not really thinking or expecting or apparently it was never a thought in their mind. We have the miracle worker here. We don't have to send them away. Apparently this was never a thought in their mind. So Jesus then says something to them that in their perspective was a little crazy. And so they come to him and they present this problem, verse 37, he answers and said to them, give you them to eat. And so they say, Jesus, we don't have any food. We're going to send them away. Jesus says, feed them. And so in their perspective, this was not the most sane idea. And so why would he say this? Some people think he was saying this in order to test his disciples. Now think about it. They have just returned from their own particular preaching, again, expeditions, preaching trip, mission, whatever word you want to use there. And they've been sent out 2 by 2. And if you remember when we talked about this a couple weeks ago, they were sent out with the power of Christ. And what did they do on their particular journey? They healed. Right? They teach, or they taught, they preached, but they also healed. They had, at least to a degree, the power of Christ available to them, and they were doing some miraculous things. And so some say that this was Jesus testing his disciples, and so basically giving them an opportunity to step out in faith and say, listen, if you want us to feed them, that's fine. You give us the power, and we'll feed them. And so some think that perhaps this was simply a test for his disciples. Others think that this was Jesus' way of showing that they were in a helpless situation. Right? There is no out other than through Jesus. And so he says, feed them. And so that would have gotten them to understand, we can't. And that's right. They can't. And so this is perhaps Jesus' way of showing them, listen, without me, this is an entirely dire and helpless situation. He is then turning the perspective off of the problem and turning the perspective onto the solution, which was himself. Now, whatever the exact purpose, whatever the exact meaning behind this particular phrase, give them to eat, it goes over their heads. They respond, shall we go and buy 200 penny worth of bread and give them to eat? Now listen, this is a sarcastic answer. This is what this is. The disciples are being sarcastic in this particular answer. Now, a pennyworth or denarius, the same word, was roughly equal to 1 day's wages. That's about what it would amount to. Now, so the amount that they have is an impressive amount as far as just taking it and looking at it on its own. They have 200 pennyworth here. So they have about 3/4 of a year's wage with them, which is, again, nothing to sneeze at. But given the situation of the thousands in front of them, it was nothing compared to what they would actually need to feed everybody. Add on top of that, the fact that there's nowhere within a walking distance that would be quick enough for them to actually get food, that would have enough food for them to feed everybody. So again, this is a helpless situation. And compound that, verse 44 tells us that there was about 5,000 men. Now what that tells us is that there was at least 5,000, because Matthew tells us in Matthew 14:21, it says, and they that had eaten were about 5,000 men beside women and children. So we don't know the exact number, but just to be conservative, it's a conservative view to see that it would be at least 2 to 3 times the number of 5,000. If you add in wives, if you add in children, if you add in sisters, if you add in all the women and children who would have been there, we understand that we're talking about a number that is vastly higher than 5,000. And so their response here was simply a sarcastic way to say, you've got to be kidding me. What do you mean, okay, fine, we'll take all the money we have, we'll go buy some bread. No, that ain't going to work, Jesus. That's what they're thinking. Not only is this not even close to enough money to buy sufficient food for so many, but you want us to spend all of our money? This is everything we have. So the situation doesn't get much better as Jesus says, all right, we'll go look for some food there in verse 38. He says unto them, how many loaves have ye? Go and see. Let's just see what we have. Again, understand this. Jesus knows what he's doing. Jesus understands the situation. Jesus knows that they don't have enough money. Jesus knows there's not enough markets in the area, even if they did have enough money. Furthermore, Jesus knows that there is not enough food within the crowd to feed the crowd. He knows all of this while he's going through this with his disciples. But the disciples come back and they say they have found 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now, when we say 5 loaves, we're not obviously talking about 5 loaves of bread. When it says 5 loaves, that would have essentially been 5 cracker-type parcels of bread. Again, this was we learned from John, this was a little boy's meal. And so this wouldn't have been enough to feed an adult. This would have been enough for one child. Just as a side note, it is interesting to me that of all of the people in this crowd, apparently only one mother had the forethought to send their child with a little bit of food. But nevertheless, Jesus sends them out. They come back and say, this is all we found. Now, at this point, they must be thinking, we've established the fact that we don't have the money. We've established now the fact that we don't have the food. Surely now Jesus is going to send them away because that's the only solution that is left. And so he must be about to send the people away. However, as William Taylor once said, he quipped this, small things are not always contemptible. It all depends on the hands in which they are. So here is Jesus presented with this problem, as it were. Not enough money, far too many mouths to feed, and a ridiculously small amount of food. And so what Jesus does next was probably pretty surprising. Verse 38, and when they knew, they say 5 loaves and 2 fishes, and he commanded them to make all sit down by companies upon the green grass. And so, again, this is one of those situations where I really would have liked to have been there. Because you have the disciples clearly trying to point Jesus in what they believe is the most logical and ethical thing to do. You've got to send everybody away so that they can go home and get the food that they need. And instead of doing that, Jesus says, no. Go make everybody sit down. Not only am I not going to tell them to leave, I need them to sit down. They need to stay here for a little while. So Jesus doesn't send them away. He commands that they sit. And so they sit down and they put them together. They organize them in ranks, it says by hundreds and by 50s. And so Jesus looks out at this group of sheep. He makes them to sit. If ever there was a New Testament fulfillment of Psalm 23, this is it. Right? Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. What is happening? You have Jesus standing out there as a shepherd in front of a sheep, and the sheep are wanting to go away. But Jesus says, no, I need you to sit. I need you to sit I need you to lie down in what would have been green pastures. You see, Jesus was getting them right where he wanted them to be in order to give them the blessing he wanted to give them. This is an interesting thing to me. Now again, put yourself in the situation. Put yourself as one of the people in that crowd. It's been all day. And whereas you've seen and heard some incredible things, you're hungry. You want food. And Jesus has never done anything even close to something like what he's about to do. Probably not a person in that crowd thought he was about to do what he's going to do. And so what they're thinking is, if he doesn't let us go soon, this hunger that I'm getting, it's about to ramp up. I need some food and I need it now. And Jesus says, sit down. The disciples nor the people knew what was about to happen. And furthermore, just from my perspective, it is likely that they thought all of this is a giant waste of time. All he's doing is delaying the inevitable. Eventually, we are going to have to leave to go get food. But what do we see? They sat. They organized them. They did what Jesus said. Their obedience to follow the command of Jesus led to what would have been an unforgettable and an incredible moment of blessing for them. Listen, we don't have to know what is going on. In fact, I would submit that most of the time we probably don't. But we don't have to know what is going on in order for us to be obedient to the commands of Christ. We just need to listen to the voice of the shepherd and sit when he says to sit. And sometimes he's going to tell us to sit, and we're going to think, that doesn't make any sense. Every impulse within me is not telling me to sit. Every impulse within me is telling me, no, I need to go because that's where the food is. But Jesus says, no, sit. So now that they are seated, again, I want you to kind of envision this. Jesus takes the food and he blesses God for the provision of the food. And so just as a side note, this just kind of gives us the origin of why we would say a blessing before eating. And when we say a blessing before eating, it's not to bless the food. The blessing is to give blessings to God for providing the food. That's what we see, and that's what Jesus did here. But again, put yourself in the perspective of those that are seated there that day, those families who are there with their young children, and they're hungry, and they want food, and Jesus has told them to sit, and they're thinking, what is he doing? Again, this is a waste of time. Not only do we not have food, but now he's making us sit and watch him bless his food. Right? What is this? And yet Jesus blesses it, and then it just begins to multiply. Now, again, I would have loved to have seen this. I don't know exactly how it did it. I don't know exactly the manner in which it began to multiply. I don't know if he just created baskets of food or if he just continuously handed to his disciples as they I don't know in which the exact manner in which this happened, but what the people saw happening before them would have absolutely been an amazing thing to see. They see not 5 loaves, but several thousand. They see not a couple of fish, but thousands upon thousands of fish. Imagine as the food kept coming, and it kept coming with seemingly no end in sight. And we know that it kept coming, and we know that it kept coming because it tells us in verse 42, and they did all eat and were filled. They did not go home hungry. They didn't just get a little bite because the food ran out. They got everything they could have wanted. They were full. And furthermore, I thought Mark Arthur made a great observation here. He said, now understand, this is crackers made from barley that was never planted. And these are fish who never swam. These are fresh, dead fish who were never alive. This is the only uncursed banquet that any of those people would have ever gone to. Not only did they have a few crackers and some fish, it was probably the best tasting thing that they had ever had because it was made miraculously straight from the hands of the Son of God. And again, it didn't come from anything cursed on the ground. It didn't come from anything cursed in the sea. It came directly from the creative power of God himself. I don't know what it tasted like, but I bet you even if you didn't like fish, I bet you'd like this. So it keeps coming, and the people keep eating. And after the eating was over, they began to pick up what was left. Jesus isn't going to waste food. So they begin to pick up what was left, and there were exactly 12 baskets full. Now, that obviously leads us in an obvious direction. So most people assume that these 12 baskets went to the disciples. And I'm not saying they didn't, Perhaps they did. But what is interesting is none of the Gospels actually tell us that. They just say that there were 12 baskets left. They never actually say that they went to the disciples. And so every Gospel mentions that there were 12 baskets left over. But it just kind of leaves us to decide what was done with those. Obviously, something was done with them. Jesus wouldn't command the leftovers to be picked up just to leave them there. Something was done with them. And so perhaps, and again, I'm not saying this is what happened, but let me just give you an alternative, because we don't know. We're not told. So let me give you an alternative. John's gospel, and we're going to go back to John here in a minute, but John's gospel mentioned that these 5 loaves and 2 fish came from a boy. That's all we know. It came from a boy. He willingly gave his food, and I'm going to assume he willingly gave his food, because I'm going to assume that Jesus nor his disciples came and ripped food out of this boy's hand. I'm going to assume that the boy willingly gave his food, and he gave it up to Jesus, probably hungry himself, had not eaten, gives it to Jesus. So this boy had faith to know that this man that he had just seen healing and performing these miracles on an individual basis could somehow do something greater with that food than would happen if he just ate it himself. And so because of this boy's faith, all of the people were fed that day. And not just that, but he ate more than he would have had he not given it to Jesus. Right? He could have had as much as he wanted, not just the 5 and the 2, as much bread, as much fish as he could have wanted. And so because of all of this, I think perhaps, and again, I'm not saying that this is what happened. I'm just saying perhaps. But perhaps Jesus let the boy and his family take those 12 baskets of food home as a way to bless him for his particular faith. Again, I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying it could have been what happened. But on the other side of that, if they did in fact go to the 12, which may be more likely. I mean, the 12 obviously is an obvious number. This is just an amazing example of the foreknowledge of Jesus. I mean, imagine this. He goes through and he creates this tremendous amount of food. And not only does every single person there that day, again, the thousands, we don't know the exact number, but all of the people there had exactly enough for them to be full. And then they'd pick up the fragments, and then there are exactly 12 baskets left over. This is not a mistake. If this was for the disciples, again, this was just the foreknowledge of Jesus, as he knew exactly the amount he needed to make to feed everybody and to have leftovers for his disciples. And so again, whether it's to bless this boy for his faith or to see the incredible foreknowledge of Christ, both of them, I think, are pretty amazing options. In conclusion this morning, we won't go and turn there, but I want to talk about John's gospel, his account, because if you read John's account of this, it gives us a lot of information about what happened afterwards. A lot of information that the other 3 don't give us. And so after this miracle, we read in the book of John that the people, they wanted to take Jesus and physically, you're going to be our king now. We've seen this miraculous event, and you will be our king now. It says in John 16, it says, then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. And when Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. And so they see this tremendous miracle, and they immediately make the connection. Hey, what he did, this must be the man that Moses was talking about. Right? Moses prophesied that there would be a prophet that would come in the same vein as Moses. And what do we associate with Moses? Well, we associate with Moses the wandering in the wilderness and the manna that fell, and they say, there was a miraculous feeding there. Well, here's a miraculous feeding. This must be that prophet. Well, they're not wrong, but what they do was wrong. They were going to literally take him, and I don't know how they thought this was going to work, but they were going to literally take him by force and say, okay, you're our king now. Go fight Rome, because that's what they wanted to happen. Well, Jesus knows what they're going to do, and so he gets away. He doesn't give them the opportunity to do this. The same people that he feeds this day, find him the next day after another miraculous thing that we'll see in the book of Mark. But they find him the next day, and they are again looking for food. It tells us again, John 16, verse 26, Jesus says, verily, verily, I say unto you, you seek me, not because you saw the miracles, but because you did eat of the